Have you ever felt like your mind is so full that you can't think at all? That's exactly where Dan found himself. Not broken, not hopeless, just stuck. Like a computer with too many tabs open. Nothing worked, everything lagged, and maybe, just maybe, what he needed wasn't more information. It was less. Dan Reynolds was the kind of person people called potential waiting to explode. At 28, he had a decent job as a software engineer in New York City, a steady income, and even a small circle of friends. On paper, things looked good. Yet every morning, he woke up with a heaviness in his chest. His days were packed. Morning emails, daily sprints, deadlines, subway rush, family pressure, and an endless scroll of Instagram success stories that whispered, "You should be doing more." Dan's apartment in Brooklyn was a reflection of his mind. Cluttered, messy, buzzing with ideas, but zero direction. He kept filling notebooks with business plans, online course notes, quotes from productivity gurus, none of which he ever finished. He was overwhelmed, not because he had no options, but because he had too many. He wasn't lazy, he was tired. One rainy Sunday evening, Dan sat alone in his room, staring at the blinking cursor on a blank Word document. He had been trying to launch a side hustle for 2 years. 10 ideas, 0 execution. Suddenly, his younger sister, Emily, walked in. "Still stuck?" she asked gently. Dan sighed. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I've read every book, watched every TED Talk, followed every mentor online, but I still feel lost." Emily sat beside him and said something that stung. "Maybe the problem is you're listening to too many voices except your own." Boom. That one sentence hit him like a storm. It echoed all night in his restless mind. Was his mind too full to move forward? A week later, Dan attended a weekend spiritual retreat up in the Catskill Mountains, mostly to escape the city noise. It was led by a monk named Swami Arun, famous for his teachings on silence and inner clarity. On the second day, the monk told a story. A student once asked his master, "Why can't I find peace?" The master smiled and handed him a glass full of muddy water. "Let it sit," he said. Hours passed. The mud settled. The water became clear. The master pointed and said, "That's your mind." The room fell silent. Dan felt a strange calm. After the session, he approached Swami Arun and asked, "What do you do when your mind is overflowing?" The monk looked into his eyes and said, "Empty it." "Of what?" "Everything. Knowledge, expectations, doubts, even hope. Start from zero. From an empty mind comes the greatest power." Back in New York City, Dan took a bold step. He called it the Empty Mind Project. For 30 days, he cut off social media, stopped consuming self-help content, and quit all multitasking. He even paused his side hustle ideas. Instead, he focused on one thing, learning to just be. Each morning, he meditated for 20 minutes, not to achieve peace, but just to observe. He journaled without goals, walked in Central Park without music, talked less, listened more. The world called it doing nothing, but inside, something deep was unfolding. Week 2 was the hardest. The silence got louder. Dan felt restless. He began doubting the process. His friends mocked him. "You're wasting time. You're falling behind. This isn't how success works." One night, he almost reactivated his Instagram and LinkedIn accounts, itching to prove he was still in the game. But he stopped, closed his laptop, took a deep breath. Instead of reacting, he asked himself, "What am I really trying to prove, and to whom?" This question became his anchor. By day 25, something strange happened. Ideas started flowing, not from books or blogs, but from within. One afternoon, while sipping coffee at a small cafe in the East Village, he noticed how the owner handled customers with ease, memory, charm, and flow. Dan scribbled in his notebook, "Simplicity is genius." Suddenly, a clear idea emerged, a platform that helped overthinkers simplify decisions, career choices, routines, learning paths. No fluff, just clarity. It was raw, unpolished, but it was his. Excited, Dan began working on the platform. He called it ClearPath. But just as he began pitching it to friends and mentors, he hit a wall. Everyone wanted complex features, AI integration, monetization plans, fancy interfaces. The simplicity of his idea was getting buried again, and with it, his confidence. One sleepless night, Dan broke down. "Maybe I'm not built for this," he whispered to himself. Maybe empty mind was just a phase. The same old doubts returned like ghosts. He almost quit. The next morning, something shifted. This Dan revisited his journal from the retreat. One line stared back at him. "From an empty mind comes the greatest power." That's when it clicked. He wasn't meant to follow others' blueprints. His job wasn't to make ClearPath big, it was to make it true. He stripped away the noise, the complexity, the pressure, rebuilt the platform with just 3 features: A 3-question clarity quiz, a weekly Do Less newsletter, a simple dashboard to track what not to do. In just 6 months, ClearPath attracted 50,000 users, creatives, entrepreneurs, students, all craving clarity in a noisy world. Dan was invited to speak at podcasts, schools, and tech summits, not as a tech wizard, but as a clarity coach. People resonated with his story. He wasn't selling motivation. He was showing people how to remove what blocks it. Investors came knocking, but this time Dan chose carefully. Partners who believed in doing less, better. His mind, still quiet, still empty, but now filled with peace, not pressure. 2 years later, Dan was living a life of purpose and design. He moved into a quiet home near the Hudson Valley, working just 4 hours a day, mentoring young creators. He didn't chase every trend. He didn't hustle endlessly. He didn't consume more than he created. He had become the monk he once admired, only in sneakers and a hoodie. The mind that once ran in circles now moved like a calm river. One evening, a student at a workshop asked him, "Dan, what's the best way to find your purpose?" He smiled and replied, "Empty your mind. Purpose is not found by running faster. It's found when you finally slow down enough to listen. An empty mind is not a void. It's a canvas. Only when we stop trying to become someone can we truly discover who we are." So if you're reading this and your mind feels full of noise, doubt, fear, pressure, maybe it's not more effort you need. Maybe it's time to empty your mind and finally see what was there all along. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Do like, share, and subscribe, and comment your thoughts.